Hi, Charles, this is SirBookSage here, and welcome to another episode of my Harry Potter First Time Reread series. I am in the middle of Goblet of Fire. We left off last time with the Quidditch World Cup, and this week it is chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. The Dark Mark, Mayhem at the Ministry, Aboard the Hogwarts Express, and the Triwizard Tournament. So, let's get started with this week's chapters. Okay, Chapter 9, The Dark Mark. Now, this is a really, really interesting chapter here. We've just had the Quidditch World Cup end, and Harry and everyone else has gone to bed, and they get woken up in the middle of the night by a very troubled Arthur Weasley. And he takes them all outside, and they see a group of wizards are marching through the encampment. And their wands are out, and above them, dangling, suspended in air, is the Muggle family that owns the field. And they're knocking people and tents out of their way as they go through. And Arthur Weasley, tells them to run into the forest and hide. Well, he goes off to confront the wizards and try to figure out what's going on and stop it. And off the kids run. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and Ginny, and Fred, and George. They all run into the forest, and they get separated, so that it's just Hermione, Ron, and Harry. And Harry somehow lost his wand in the middle of all this. I mean, they're still in their, pajamas and bathrobes and things. They didn't even have time to get dressed. And they, of course, encounter, there's Draco, kind of chilling there, leaning up against a tree. And enjoying the whole moment, basically hinting that his father probably is one of the people in the masks, without coming out and directly saying it. But there's an interesting exchange here. On the surface, it's Draco being a total dick, being the total ass again, and threatening Hermione. And because he's letting them know that Hermione, they're going to come for you if you don't get out of here. Now, on the one hand, it's Draco being Draco, but on the other hand, he is, interestingly enough, giving Hermione, letting her know, a warning that, hey, you best be scarce because they will come after you as, the whole mudblood thing, because her parents are Muggles. And in a way, whether he intends it or not, Draco's actually doing a service to Hermione and Ron and Harry. He could have easily said nothing. In fact, kind of made sure to drive them back out into the crowd towards this group of wizards in the masks, so that they would go after her. But he does the opposite. Again, whether he means to or not, he actually gives her a warning and is helping her kind of lay low, stay out of the way. So I just thought it was an interesting scene that could really, however you interpret Draco, is how you're going to take that moment. He's being malicious and vicious, or he's actually trying to protect her and help her in a weird way. But off they run farther, and this is we get to the point where we get a major event in the whole series takes place here. And this is Rowling really ratcheting up the suspense, the tension, the conflict. The story itself takes a big step up here. And that's with the Dark Mark being shot up into the sky. They can tell they're kind of hiding in this isolated part of the forest. But Harry can tell that there's somebody there. And they can't see this person, but up from wherever these bushes and things are, comes this Dark Mark, which visually done so well in the movies. And Hermione knows what it is, but of course Harry has no idea, and Ron doesn't seem to have any idea either. And immediately, the mark goes out, and then everyone starts showing up. Barty Crouch Sr. shows up. Cedric Diggory's father, Mr. Arthur Weasley, shows up. But they discover before this, they discover that the house elf Winky is hiding in those bushes over there. And Winky has Harry's wand. And Barty Crouch Sr. just absolutely loses it and starts making accusations. He's going to give his house elf clothes to set her free because she's unworthy. And it's an interesting power dynamic you see on display between Barty Crouch Sr., Cedric's father, and Mr. Weasley. All this kind of a really interesting office politics as well, in a way, between these people. And how, even though they're all really emotional, they each pull back when they realize they're starting to go a little too far. But whoever, Winky insists that she didn't send up the dark mark, but it was Harry's wand that was used, because they can touch the wand with another wand to see what the last spell that wand you did was, and it was that spell. But clearly, Harry and these kids have no idea how to invoke that spell. And I don't know whether Winky could or not. But it's a great setup here, because it's Barty Crouch Sr.'s elf with Harry Potter's wand. Why would this house elf be there? There's really only... And you don't really catch it maybe the first time around. Obviously Barty Crouch Sr. didn't send Winky there to do this. But she's the house elf for the Crouch family, and who else is in the Crouch family but Barty Crouch Jr., who... This is, again, Rowling kind of setting in place information that makes sense later by having this scene play out the way it plays out. But really, really great chapter. And we learn more now. We learn what the Dark Mark is. We learn about the Death Eaters, that they were Voldemort's main followers. And so you assume that that group of wizards with the masks on, you assume they're Death Eaters, or at least pretending to be Death Eaters, whether it's for fun, as a bad joke, or perhaps they really are Death Eaters, and they're playing around. Interestingly enough, when they saw the Dark Mark, the Death Eaters all disapparated, scattered out of there, and ran away really quick. So it seemed to scare them. And when we're being told about the Death Eaters in the past and with Voldemort, I think it's Mr. Weasley brings up a really good point. It's we know there are people who were Death Eaters that live and work amongst us, and who claimed that they were followers of Voldemort against their will, that they were basically sorcered, spelled into following him. And Arthur Weasley could see that it makes sense that they probably wouldn't necessarily be happy if Voldemort actually did return, because they didn't go to Azkaban for him. They told the whole wizarding world, they did it against their will. They weren't really Voldemort supporters. So they might be the least happy people to see Voldemort come back. Those remaining followers who managed to basically get away with it. And back to bed they go, to wake up early and get to a Portkey and get the hell out of there. But really, really good chapter. And following right on the heels of the Quidditch World Cup, which was so exciting and fun. And then, boom, this hits. Death Eaters, the Dark Mark. We get lots of world building done in a really interesting and exciting way here. And we get Rowling layering in, information for the main plot of the story here. And machinations that are already taking place behind the scenes that we won't know until the end of the book. So, really great chapter. One of my favorite chapters in this book. All right, Chapter 10, Mayhem at the Ministry. This is a really quick chapter. It is dealing with the aftermath of the Death Eaters and the Dark Mark. And They arrive at home. Mrs. Weasley's up waiting for them outside because she's got to copy the Daily Prophet. And she's been worried that something happened to Arthur and her sons and Harry and Hermione. So she's super relieved. Upset that she had... her last words to Fred and George were mean. And she didn't want... what if that was the last thing she ever got to say to them? And so it's an emotional reunion there. But the main kind of point of this chapter is through the paper, the Daily Prophet, we get introduced secondhand here to Rita Skeeter and her over-the-top sort of tabloid reporting style. And not how she just makes sort of... doesn't necessarily make things up, or I guess she does, but she takes what's said and then twists it into all sorts of things to take it in whatever direction she wants. And Arthur and Percy pretty much end up going into the ministry to work. And I think this, about at least a week or so, takes place in this chapter where Arthur's pretty much constantly at work trying to put out fires and everything. And we're just beginning to see, you know, the effects of the Death Eaters and the Dark Mark rippling throughout the Wizarding world and how that impacts the ministry itself. And separate from that, we have Harry just sort of wondering, where's Hedwig? He's waiting for Hedwig to come back with a response to the letter he sent to Sirius. And he finally breaks down and tells Ron and Hermione that his scar was hurting, and the correlation between, you know, the scar hurts when Voldemort's like physically near. And what does it mean now that obviously Voldemort wasn't roaming around Pivot Drive? So there must be some more to his scar and his connection to Voldemort, which is an important little moment in the overall story. But it's nice how she's bringing that back up here and layering it in for future use. But overall, a really quick chapter. It's a lot of just the Weasley family. There's a moment described there where Percy's doing this thing and Bill's like working on something here and Charlie's like fixing his baklava robe, and Fred and George are sort of whispering and writing together, and it's like a nice little family snapshot of the Weasley household. And Harry's sitting on the floor cleaning, polishing his firebolt with the kit Hermione had given him. And just, I always love the Weasley family moments that we get, because they're such contrast to Harry's home life and all the events that take place at Hogwarts. And I really enjoy them, and we get a nice little scene here with all of that. But overall, just a really quick chapter meant to show us the impact of the Death Eaters and the Dark Mark, and meant especially to introduce us to the character of Rita Skeeter, who we'll get to see in the story later. And that's pretty much it. It's kind of a pause and setup chapter before we begin getting into like main story events again. Chapter 11, Aboard the Hogwarts Express. This is another really quick chapter. It's a chapter we pretty much get in every book of their the train ride on the Hogwarts Express to the school. I guess the only book we didn't really get this was Chamber of Secrets, because they ended up, Harry ended up in the flying car because they missed the train. They were actually prevented from getting on the train by Dobby. But the train ride is always a fun chapter. It's always an interesting chapter. Rowling uses it a lot of times to reintroduce characters, like secondary characters in the story. Like here, we're reintroduced to Seamus and Dean and Neville. But first, as they're about to get on the train, Mrs. Weasley, Charlie, and Bill all drop hints that something special is going to be taking place at Hogwarts this year. Though they won't reveal it, they won't spill the beans, which, of course, frustrates Fred and George in particular, even more so than Harry and Ron and Hermione. But they get on the train, and they overhear Draco in the next compartment talking about I think it's Durmstrang, another one of the wizarding schools that he wished he had an opportunity to go to instead, because not only did they teach defense against the dark arts, but they taught the dark arts themselves. And Hermione then gives a brief education to the reader through giving it to Harry and Ron, letting them know that there's multiple wizarding schools, and they're kind of all hidden and protected. Even Hogwarts is. If a muggle were to somehow stumble across Hogwarts, it would look like just an abandoned ruin that was with signs that say danger, no, don't enter. And the other schools must have similar sort of magical protections. And that they're also protected against even being able to be plotted on a map. So their specific locations are actually secret and hidden, because there's a lot of what's the word? I don't know why the word is... I'm drawing a blank right now. There's a lot of competitiveness between the schools, a lot of distrust between the schools, rivalries between the schools. They want to guard their own secrets from the other schools. So you don't actually know where Hogwarts is specifically, or where Durmstrang is, or the other school. I'm forgetting the name. It's the French school. You don't really know where they are. The people who go there know, but their specific location is hidden, which is an interesting concept and an interesting thing. That even within the wizarding world itself, there's this compartmentalization between these different factions of the wizarding world in different countries. But the last bit of this chapter is, of course, Draco, being Draco, showing up with Crabbe and Goyle, who have now grown like another foot. They're both like really big now. And he immediately starts making fun of Ron's dress robes, because Ron has these second-hand, hand-me-down dress robes his mother had to get for him, because they have to wear dress robes at some point in the school year. And Ron's got them draped over the owl cage. And, of course, Draco just does what he does and manages to mock the Weasleys, infuriate Ron. And then Draco also mentions that, there's a special event happening, and then he realizes that they have no idea, which he just totally trolls and makes fun of them for. That your dad and your brother work at the ministry, and you don't know what's going on. That's crazy. And, your dad's probably not even important enough to even know what's going on. And just typical. And it's one thing that I've noticed more in this reread is how much of the animosity and hostilities are Draco and Ron, really. Far more even than Draco and Harry. It's Draco really goes after Ron and just pushes Ron's buttons every opportunity he gets. Far more than anybody else. Which I didn't really notice the first time around, because, you look at this as a rivalry in a sense between Harry and Draco. But Draco really does give most of his attention to just pushing the Weasleys in particular, and Ron in particular. So I just really kind of stood out to me in this chapter that, that's kind of what that's kind of what Draco does. He really picks on Ron the most out of the three of them. And just an observation. But they get there, they get off the train, and one thing also that's been a repetitive imagery in this whole opening of the book is it's been raining a whole hell of a lot. Rowling's been using the weather, using rain, like really heavy downpours of rain, quite a bit in these opening chapters. Kind of almost a mood setter, that kind of just putting it in the back of your head that there's going to be some pretty heady and heavy events that are taking place in this book. So she's kind of just subconsciously, subliminally setting that mood by the weather. And there's a nice little reminder, a little world building reinforcement here. When they get off, they say hello to Hagrid. And the reference that the first years are going to get on their boats and go across the lake. And this is like Hermione, I can't imagine having to do that in this kind of weather. And then they get on the sort of horseless carriages and off they are to Hogwarts. And that's how the chapter ends. Again, a quick little chapter, a transition chapter. It's always fun to that bridge chapter between the whole opening section of the book and then Hogwarts. And a lot of fun. There's always interesting things on the train. We're always given hints of things to come, usually in this little train ride. And I always enjoy it. Trains in general are really cool, and a train like Hogwarts Express must be a really fun train ride to take, just in general, train-wise. Chapter 12, the Triwizard Tournament. So they get to the castle. They climb down off the carriages. It's just a gale storm now, pouring rain. They're soaked. They run up the stone steps, get into the sort of main entrance hall where the rain's no longer coming down on them. And then all of a sudden they get bombarded by water balloons from the Ghost Peeves. Just chucking balloons. They hit Ron right in the head and soak Harry's feet and shoes and socks. And a bunch of other people are getting bombarded by them to the point where Professor McGonagall has to come out and try to chase Peeves away. And then it's into the Great Hall, where they all take their seats. All the different houses have their own sections, and Ron is starving, and they're just waiting for the first years to arrive from their boat ride so they can all be sorted, and then the food can show up. And finally, the first years all walk in, and at the very back of the line of first years, the smallest kid is it's Dennis Creevey, the younger brother of Colin Creevey, who, of course, had to come over and say hello to Harry right away and let him know that his brother was coming to school this year. And Dennis is walking with Hagrid's huge coat draped over him. And we learn that Colin, when Dennis sees Colin, Colin's like, "I fell in the lake," which is just hysterical. And that, so everyone all gets sorted. Dennis, of course, gets sorted into Gryffindor. And we learn that he fell into the lake, and something in the lake actually grabbed him and put him back in the boat. So, which is really cool. Nice little, I know from what I remember, there's scenes where they go into the lake in the tournament and everything. So, nice little beginning, like, setup for that stuff. But Dumbledore speaks. He announces there's no Quidditch tournament this year, which of course freaks Harry and Fred and George and everybody out. And then he's about to announce what this secret thing is, what the special event that everyone's been hinting at, what this is. And just before he can say it, the doors burst open, and in walks Mad-Eye Moody, who's the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. And Moody is just weathered and just scarred all over the face, disfigured, because he was an Auror who spent most of his life hunting dark wizards. And you can see the scars of that life all over him. And he's got one regular eye and then one crazy blue eye, which is constantly looking around at everything, even going and looking into his own head. So you only see the whites, and it's always just moving and constantly watching. And he comes in and sits down and starts about getting ready to eat, but he pulls out a flask and takes a drink from this flask. And that's our first look at that, of Moody drinking from his flask. And again, nicely done by Rowling, just kind of slips it in there. And just a really good introduction to Moody. The way he's described, and comes in and just sits down, and he's the eyes kind of like looking at everybody, constantly on watch, constantly on guard. And then Dumbledore finally proceeds to announce the Triwizard Tournament that hasn't happened in over 100 years because all the deaths, they kind of stopped doing it. And they're finally bringing it back, and the Durmstrang and Beauxbaton schools are going to be participating in it. They're going to be coming in October. And there's going to be a champion from each school chosen to represent the school, and then they're going to all participate against each other, those three, to see who becomes the Triwizard champion. And Dumbledore says that, of course, only 17 years and up, which upsets a lot of the school, in particular Fred and George, who are going to be 17 in April, but right now they're too young. So there's going to be an impartial judge who's going to pick from among the candidates from each school who their representative will be. So naturally, as they go off to their rooms, to Gryffindor Tower, Fred and George begin plotting how they're going to trick this impartial judge to convince whoever this judge is that they're really 18, and there's like a potion that they've got, like an aging potion, and then Ron starts imagining maybe, he and Harry should try to put their names in too and trick this judge, whoever it's going to be. And then Harry goes off into sleep, imagining himself winning the Triwizard Tournament, holding up the trophy, and in amongst the crowd there's Cho Chang, who he saw earlier at the Ravenclaw table. And in this chapter, Rowling is kind of reestablishing that sort of romantic element that Harry has with Cho that we saw in the Prisoner of Azkaban begin to kind of blossom. So really great, setup. The Sorting Hat sang a whole new song this time, which was a really interesting song. Again, used as world building to, here's the four wizards, the houses they founded, the school they founded, and that kids were originally sorted by these heads of house, and then Gryffindor came up with a sorting hat to be able to properly sort people once they were all gone. So really, really well done little song. And a nice little note, which I didn't even realize, that Harry missed the sorting ceremony the last 2 years. He had his own, he was at his own, obviously, but he didn't make it to the sorting ceremony in Chamber of Secrets or the Prisoner of Azkaban because of the events that happened in the beginnings of those books. He missed both times. So this is our first time actually really seeing the sorting again, and Harry getting to see it again. And this is another really fun scene overall, where you get into Hogwarts. There's the Great Hall, the sort of magical ceiling, and which is, in this particular case, matching the storm outside. And it's a good reintroduction to all the teachers. We were reintroduced to Snape and everybody else. Again, like the train ride, this is another great sort of setup scene, transition scene, to get us from preschool, the events that take place before school year, and now the school year beginning the next day. So these are always chapters that Rowling's really, really good at just putting in proper world building, things we need to know, introducing characters that are going to be important, and dropping in little hints of what's to come, like by the end of the book. So I always enjoy these couple of chapters here. There's like that nice little pause before we get into the meat of the story. And that is this week's chapters. Really fun ones. From the dark arts, we get a lot thrown at us in this, again, set of chapters here. The stakes are really ratcheted up, and we're beginning to see that, and we saw some of it in Prisoner of Azkaban, that there's a lot more to this wizarding world than we saw in the first couple books. And there's a lot more darkness in this world. And we're beginning to see the wizarding world splinter again as Voldemort begins to recuperate and regain his strength. We're starting to see the impacts of just knowing he's there, or at least the people on the dark arts side knowing he's there. because the main wizarding world is still kind of ignoring it. And other than someone like Dumbledore and Harry and Ron and Hermione, most of the regular wizarding world is still oblivious to the fact that Voldemort's back. But in these chapters here, we begin to see that whether they're oblivious or not, changes are already occurring in this wizarding world. And good set of chapters introducing us to people, to plot. And now the Triwizarding Tournament. That's going to really drive the whole plot of the book. And next week's chapters are, check my thing here, it's going to be chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. Mad-Eye Moody, The Unforgivable Curse, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, and The Goblet of Fire. That's the next set of chapters next week. I am happy to be back, hopefully, on my regular Monday schedule with this going forward after my sort of work-induced hiatus from this reread. But it feels good to be back doing it again, and I'm really excited. This was the first 4 books I read over that Thanksgiving weekend. Just boom, 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 boom. So it's nice to be back reading this book again. I haven't read it since that Thanksgiving weekend many, many years ago. And I remember really, really enjoying this book. And so far, so good. I'm about 144 pages in. I've got still quite a bit to go here, so. But really, really such a good book. And I'm excited to dive into the actual meat of the story starting next week. So I am Charles, this is SirBookSage. Happy reading.